The phone rang at 6:42 in the morning. I remember the time because I was standing at the kitchen window watching the frost melt off the bird feeder my late wife had hung there 23 years ago. And the digital clock on the microwave caught my eye when I turned to grab the receiver. My daughter-in-law's name lit up the screen. She never called me before 10. Never. In 8 years of marriage to my son, that woman had never once dialed my number before the second cup of coffee was poured. "The auction starts at noon," she said. No hello. No good morning. Just that flat, tight voice she used when she wanted something. "Did you wire the deposit yet?" I set my coffee down. I asked her, real slow, what auction she was talking about. There was a pause on the other end. The kind of pause where you can hear someone's brain scrambling. Then she laughed, a short, brittle thing, and said, "Oh my God, I thought your son told you. We bought a house yesterday. Closing's tomorrow, but we need the down payment by noon today or we lose it." I asked her how much. $180,000 for the deposit. The house is $850. I sat down at the kitchen table. The wood was cold under my elbow. I'd lived in this house since 1987. My wife and I bought it for $62,000, and we ate ramen noodles for 2 years to make the mortgage. My son was born in the upstairs bedroom because the snowstorm of '91 kept the ambulance from getting through. Every nail in this place had a story, and I'd just been told my own son had bought a house worth nearly $900,000 without so much as mentioning it at Sunday dinner 3 days ago. I told her I'd think about it. She didn't like that. I could hear her breathing change. She said something about how I always promised to help, how my son was counting on me, how this was a now or never opportunity. She said the words generational wealth twice. She said them the way some people say amen. I told her I'd call my son when I was ready. Then I hung up. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. 20 years ago, before I retired from the freight company, my hands would have shaken. I would have already been at the bank by 7 a.m. with my checkbook open and my heart bleeding apologies. But I'm 68 now, and somewhere along the way, between burying my wife and watching my son become a man I no longer recognized, I had stopped being the man who shook. Let me back up. My son is 36 years old. He has a degree in business administration that I paid for. He has a truck that I co-signed for, even though by then he was 29 and should have been past co-signing. He has a job in commercial real estate that I helped him get through an old fishing buddy of mine, and he's been at that job for 11 years. But every spring he calls me up sounding tired and asks if I can cover his property taxes, his car insurance, his vacation to wherever his wife wanted to go that year. Aruba, Cabo. Once, somewhere in Iceland, where they took photographs of themselves drinking from a glacier. I always said yes. Always. Because his mother made me promise. In the last month of her life, when the morphine was making her words slow and certain, that I would never let our boy go without. She squeezed my hand and she said, "Promise me he never feels alone in this world." I kept that promise the only way I knew how, which was the wrong way. I paid, and I paid, and I paid. His wife came into the picture 6 months after the funeral. He brought her over for Thanksgiving and she walked through my house with her phone out, taking pictures of the wood molding and the built-in bookcase my father-in-law had made by hand in 1962. She asked me what year the house was built. She asked me if I'd ever had it appraised. She complimented my late wife's china cabinet and asked if there was a plan for it. I should have known then. I think part of me did. But grief is a way of making you grateful for anyone who shows up at the door. And my son seemed happy, or at least less hollow than he'd been since his mother passed. And so I told myself she just had a business-like way about her. I told myself she'd warm up. She didn't warm up. She got colder and more efficient. And over the next 8 years, she became the operating system that ran my son's whole life. He stopped calling me on his own. Every call came through her. Every visit was scheduled by her. Every Christmas card came signed in her handwriting, with his name printed below in the same loopy script, like she'd signed it for him too. And every spring, every fall, Every time something big came up, the phone would ring, and she would tell me what my son needed. I gave them money for their wedding, $42,000, because she wanted a venue on a vineyard 2 hours outside the city and a band flown in from Nashville. I gave them money for the honeymoon. I gave them money when they bought their first car as a couple, a German thing that cost more than my first house. I paid off her student loans when she cried at my dining room table about how they were holding her back. I gave them $10,000 to put a deposit on a condo they ended up not buying because she changed her mind about the neighborhood, the total, by my count. By the time that phone rang on that frozen Tuesday morning, was just over $300,000. Almost a third of what my wife and I had saved across 40 years of careful living. And now they wanted 180 more. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. I made another pot of coffee. I let it get cold. I watched a pair of chickadees fight over the last seeds in the feeder, and I thought about how my wife used to say those birds had marriages that lasted longer than most humans. Then I called my brother. My brother is 2 years older than me. He's a retired attorney. He moved out to Arizona 10 years ago because the dry air helps his lungs. But we talk every Sunday, and I trust him the way I trust the engine in my old truck, which is to say, completely and without question. I told him everything. The phone call, the number, the auction at noon. I told him about the $300,000. I told him I'd lain awake some nights wondering if my son even knew what kind of woman he'd married, or if he'd known all along and was just letting her drive. My brother was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What does your gut tell you?" I told him my gut had been telling me the same thing for 8 years and I'd been ignoring it. He said, "Then stop ignoring it. But before you do anything, drive over to that house. The one they want to buy. Drive past it. Look at it with your own eyes, and then come back and call me." So that's what I did. I got in my truck and I drove the 45 minutes across town to the address she'd texted me right after the call, before she even knew if I'd said yes, because she was that confident the money was coming. The house was beautiful. I won't lie about that. It was a new build, one of those modern things with big windows and a roof that came down at sharp angles like a piece of folded paper. 3-car garage. A yard with new sod laid down in strips you could still see the seams of. It was on a cul-de-sac with 5 other houses just like it, all of them looking like they'd been printed from the same machine. But here's what I noticed. Parked in the driveway, behind a real estate company's sold pending sign, was a brand new SUV. A big one, cream-colored, and I recognized it, because I'd seen it in the pictures my daughter-in-law had posted on her social media just 3 weeks ago when she'd announced their early Christmas gift to each other. That SUV cost $90,000. I knew because she'd mentioned the price at Easter the year before, when they were thinking about getting one. So let me lay this out the way it laid itself out in my head, sitting in my truck across the street from that fresh-built house. My son and his wife had just bought a brand new $90,000 vehicle 3 weeks ago. They were now closing on an $850,000 house, and they were calling me at 6:42 in the morning, telling me they didn't have the down payment. I drove home. I called my brother. I told him what I'd seen. He said one sentence. He said, "Don't send the money, and don't tell them you saw the car." I didn't. Noon came and went. I sat in my recliner with a book I wasn't reading. The phone started ringing at 12:04. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again at 12:11, then 12:20. Then she started texting. The first text was polite. "Did you get my call? Auction is happening now." The second one was tighter. "I really need to know. We're going to lose it." The third one was the mask coming off. "I cannot believe you would do this to your own son, after everything he's done for you." I read that one twice. After everything he's done for me. I tried to think of one thing my son had done for me in the last decade. I came up with a tie he'd given me for Father's Day 3 years ago that still had the price tag tucked in the inside pocket. $48. From a discount store. The fourth text came at 1:15. Pick up the phone or we're done with you. I put the phone face down on the side table and I made myself a sandwich. My son called at 2:30. His voice was the voice I remembered from when he was a teenager getting caught lying about something small. High and fast and full of injured feelings. He said the auction was over. They'd lost the house. He said his wife was crying. He said he didn't know what I was thinking. He said he thought I would always be there for him. I asked him, very calmly, how the new car was running. He went quiet. Dead quiet. I could hear his wife saying something in the background, urgent and sharp. He told her to hold on. He came back on the line and he said, "What car?" "The cream-colored one. In the driveway of the house you were trying to buy." Another silence. Then he tried to laugh. "Dad, that's a lease. It's nothing. It's basically free." I told him I knew what a lease on a $90,000 vehicle cost per month, because I'd been in the freight business for 40 years and I'd leased plenty of trucks, and there is no version of that math where the payment is basically free. He started to argue. I let him talk for a minute. Then I told him I had to go, and I hung up. I want to tell you that I felt strong in that moment. I want to tell you I felt some kind of righteous calm. But the truth is, I sat in my recliner after that and I cried. Hard. For the first time since my wife's funeral, not because of the money, because somewhere in the last hour I had finally admitted to myself that my boy was a stranger. The kid who used to ride on my shoulders at the county fair and fall asleep against my chest during Sunday afternoon ball games. He was gone. Maybe he'd been gone a long time, and I'd just been refusing to bury him. My brother flew in that weekend. He didn't ask. He just told me he was coming, and I should pick him up at the airport on Saturday morning. The first thing he did when he got to the house was sit me down at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a pen. He said, "We're going to do an inventory." We went through everything. The house, paid off in 2003, the retirement accounts, which my wife and I had built up steady over 40 years, and which I had been dipping into every time my son needed something. The life insurance for my wife, which I'd never touched, sitting in a separate account collecting modest interest, the lake cabin 2 hours north, which had belonged to my wife's parents, and which we promised each other we'd keep in the family. My brother wrote it all down. Then he flipped the page, and on a fresh sheet he wrote, in his careful attorney's handwriting, the figure $307,000. Underneath he wrote, "Gifted to son and daughter-in-law, 2017 present." He looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. He said, "Do you understand that this is roughly the value of your wife's entire share of what you two built together?" I understood it. I'd never put it in those words before. But I understood it. He said, "She wouldn't have wanted this." I knew that too. So we made a plan. My brother stayed for a week. We met with a financial advisor he'd known for 30 years. We met with an estate attorney. We restructured everything. The will got rewritten. The trust got set up. The accounts got moved. I learned the difference between giving and enabling. The way a man finally learns the difference between a friend and a parasite when he's been bled long enough to notice the difference in his own heartbeat. We also made one more decision. We decided I would not cut my son off in some dramatic, angry way. I would simply stop saying yes, quietly, without explanation. The next time the phone rang asking for money, I would say I couldn't, and the next time, and the next time, and the next time, and eventually he would figure out, the way a grown man should have figured out 15 years ago, that the river had run dry. The first call came 2 weeks later. Property tax season. My daughter-in-law's voice on the line, sweet again, the way she got when she wanted something and was pretending the previous fight had never happened. I told her I couldn't help. She asked why. I said I'd had some unexpected expenses. She said, in that voice that always made the hair on my neck stand up, "What expenses? You don't have any expenses. You live alone in a paid-off house." I told her my expenses were my own business, and I hung up. The texts came again. Different this time. Less anger, more strategy. She tried guilt. She tried bringing up my wife, saying how mom would have wanted me to take care of her grandchildren, even though there were no grandchildren and never had been because they'd decided early on that kids weren't in their lifestyle. She tried fear, saying they might have to sell the new car. I told her in my head, good, sell it. I never wrote back. My son called twice that month. Both times I answered. Both times I answered. Both times he asked, eventually after the small talk that he was clearly making himself do, whether I could help out just this once. Both times I said no. The second time he raised his voice. He said he couldn't believe I'd turned into this. This. Like I was a weather pattern that had inconvenienced him. I told him I loved him. I told him I always would. I told him I always would. I told him I was not a bank. He hung up on me. 3 months passed. 4. The phone stopped ringing on those familiar rhythms. I learned what silence felt like when it wasn't being interrupted by demands. I started taking long walks in the morning. I joined a woodworking club at the community center. I drove up to the lake cabin one weekend and spent 4 days just sitting on the dock, watching the water. The same way my wife and I used to do. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like she was next to me again. Then, on a Tuesday in early June, I got a letter in the mail. A real letter, in an envelope, hand-addressed, from my son. I opened it at the kitchen table. It was 3 pages long. The first page was an apology. A real one, not the kind he used to give when he wanted something. He told me he'd been seeing a therapist. He told me his wife had moved out 2 months ago. He told me he was going to file for divorce. He told me he'd found out, going through their accounts after she left, that she'd been hiding credit card debt close to $90,000, and that the house auction had only been the most recent of a string of times she'd lied to him about their finances. The second page was the part that made me put the letter down and walk to the window. He wrote that he'd thought, his whole adult life, that I gave him money because I expected something back. He wrote that every time he took it, he felt smaller. He wrote that his wife had told him over and over that I owed it to him, that it was the least I could do, that all parents did this, and that any guilt he felt was something I had planted in him on purpose. He wrote that he was sorry he had ever believed her. He wrote that he was 36 years old, and he had never paid for his own life, and he didn't know how to start. The third page was just a request. He asked if he could come over. Not for money, just to talk. I read the letter twice. I folded it back into the envelope. I put it on the kitchen table next to my coffee cup, where my wife used to put the bills she wanted me to remember to pay. I sat there for a long time, watching the chickadees, and I thought about what my wife would have said. I think she would have said, "Let him in, but make him knock first." I called him the next morning. I told him he could come for Sunday dinner. He came. He brought groceries. Real groceries, the kind you actually cook with, in his own paper bag from the actual grocery store. Paid for, I assume, with his own money. He helped me make the meatloaf my wife used to make. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't mention money once. He cried a little, in the middle of dinner, when he picked up his fork and realized it was the same set we'd had since he was a child. He said he'd forgotten how heavy they were. I'm not telling you everything is fixed. It isn't. He has a long road ahead of him. He has debts he has to dig out of, a loan, and habits he has to break, and a divorce to get through that isn't going to be clean, because she's the kind of person who will fight for every penny that was never hers. But for the first time in a decade, I have a son again, a real one. A man, not a customer. And me? I have something I haven't had since the day my wife died. I have my own life back. I have my own bank account, with its own rules, that nobody but me decides what to do with. I have a daughter-in-law who is no longer my daughter-in-law and who will, if my brother's lawyering is any good, never see another dollar of mine. Last weekend I drove past that house on the cul-de-sac, the one they tried to buy. There was a different family living there now, a young couple with a little girl playing in the yard, chasing a tired-looking golden retriever in big, slow circles. The cream-colored SUV was gone. The grass had grown in. The seams were gone too. I sat in my truck for a few minutes, just watching that little girl chase that dog, and I thought about the morning the phone had rung at 6:42 and how close I'd come, one more time, to picking it up and saying yes. Then I drove home. The bird feeder needed filling. My wife had always done it on Tuesday mornings, and I'd let it go empty too many times since she'd been gone. I filled it that afternoon. I sat on the porch and I watched the chickadees come back, one at a time, like they'd been waiting for me to remember. I thought about what she used to say, those last weeks when she was teaching me how to live without her. She used to say that love isn't a transaction, that you don't keep score with the people you love, but you also don't let them keep score against you. It took me 10 years after she said it to understand what she meant. But I understand now, and I'm 68 years old, and my house is paid off, and my truck runs fine, and my brother calls me every Sunday, and my son knocked on my door last week with a paper bag of groceries in his arms and tears in his eyes. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. I think about that morning a lot. The frost on the bird feeder. The phone ringing at 6:42. The way my hands didn't shake, after 20 years of shaking. And I keep coming back to the same understanding. The one it took me a decade too long to reach. Everything that happens between people, good or bad, is the slow result of small choices stacked on top of each other. My daughter-in-law didn't show up at my door one day as the woman she became. She was built, one yes at a time, by my son and by me. Every check I wrote without asking a question was a brick in the wall she eventually stood behind. Every time I looked the other way when something felt off, I taught both of them that looking the other way was the price of staying close. The auction at noon wasn't the cause of anything. It was just the moment the bill finally came due. What I learned, sitting in my truck across the street from that fresh-built house, is that love without honesty isn't love at all. It's a kind of cowardice dressed up in soft clothes. My wife understood this. She tried to tell me in her own way those last weeks. She wasn't asking me to spoil our boy, she was asking me to never let him feel abandoned. There's a difference, and I missed it for years. A man's job, as I see it now, is to build 3 things in the people he loves. Character, so they know the difference between what they want and what they're owed. Judgment, so they can see a situation the way it actually is, not the way someone wants them to see it. And strength, the quiet kind. The kind that lets a person say no to the people closest to them, when the truth requires it. I gave my son none of those things. I gave him money instead, because money was easier, and grief had made me lazy. And saying yes felt like keeping a promise to his mother when it was actually breaking it. When my son finally came back to me with that paper bag of groceries, he didn't come back because I had cut him off. He came back because, for the first time in his adult life, he had been forced to look at himself without my checkbook in the way. That's what consequences do. When we finally stop blocking them, they hold up a mirror. So if you're somewhere in the middle of a story like mine, with someone you love who has learned to take from you instead of stand beside you, I'll tell you what my brother told me at the kitchen table that Saturday morning. Stop ignoring your gut. The truth doesn't get easier the longer you wait. And the most loving thing you can do sometimes is let the people you love feel the weight of their own choices, while you go fill the bird feeder and remember who you were before you forgot.